So, welcome everybody into the channel. Hey, I am real excited today. I have a guest with me, one of my favorite authors. I have with me today Hasan Kubba, who most of you will probably know as the co-author of the book, The Unfair Advantage, How You Already Have What It Takes to Succeed. Hasan, welcome into the channel.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here, Paul.
I'm excited. Hopefully we can have this kind of a conversational type of style. There's a lot of things in the unfair advantage that we could talk about. But first, if we could kind of frame it up a little bit for those that aren't familiar with Hasan, he co-authored this book with Ash Ali, The Unfair Advantage. It's how you already have what it takes to succeed. It received the honor of being named the Business Book of the Year 2021. So I'm sure that was a great accomplishment for you. Also, his TED Talk titled Startups, Entrepreneurship, and Unfair Advantages was voted the highest ever on the official TED subreddit. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure you check that out. And I also understand that you're also a professional life coach and a business coach, a bit of angel investing and looking at startups. So if you can, a little bit, just kind of talk us through that journey a little bit and tell us, what's that been like for you?
Sure. Yeah, it's been quite an incredible journey. So I started off, first I was born in Baghdad in Iraq, and I came to the UK, to London when I was 3 years old, just to escape Saddam and the whole war and everything. And I grew up in London, and I think what I was going to be is a doctor, because that's kind of a typical immigrant thing. You want the low risk career for your kids, and a doctor's well respected around the world. There's always demand for it. So, and I was good at science, so I thought I'd be a doctor. I ended up just completely dropping out of that path because I was like, this isn't for me. I don't want to be in a world of just hospitals, patients, disease. I don't think that's right for me. I want to learn more about the world. So I decided to do economics. And that's how I kind of learned about like mental models. Economics was interesting because I learned about mental models and the way that they try to map out and determine why the economy behaves the way it does. And actually, they're very bad at it. They can't even predict like recessions, downturns, things like that, which was fascinating. But then the path from there, especially like in London, I think it's the same like maybe in New York. It's like in New York, it's Wall Street. In London, it's the City of London, which is like going into finance. So if you're ambitious, you'll go into banking, finance, a hedge fund, something like that. It just didn't appeal to me, Paul. So what I decided to do instead is just take some time out and think about what I want to do next when I graduated university. And I decided that I want to take this course. I came across this course and it was based on the 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And the whole idea was that you can set up a business that you can not only have a lot of money, which is what you can get if I worked in the City of London, I could have done that, but I also have a lot of time. I also have a lot of flexibility. And that's really what appealed to me. It's that freedom. So I was like, sign me up. I had saved some money from my student loan and all of this kind of stuff. And I just put it in. And everyone said, Hasan, you're crazy. This is just a complete scam. You can't, make a passive income business. No way is that going to work. They can't do a 4 Hour Work Week business. I was like, I feel like I've done my due diligence and I think this makes sense. You do a service-based business. You delegate all the different pieces of it. You're the person that becomes the one who gets the clients, does all the biz dev essentially, and you project manage it. And it wasn't taught to me in those terms. I'm using kind of more businessy corporate terms for it, but it was just taught like, hey, you could do this thing. And so I did. And I ended up for 2 years after a lot of procrastination, perfectionism, failure to start, failure to launch. I did eventually end up starting, and I was doing 80-hour work weeks, not four. But after about 2 years, about a year and a half, I started to actually be able to rely on my team to handle things. And I didn't have to do much, which was fascinating because I had shifted the business to a kind of a retainer business. I was doing actually SEO at the time. I was doing all these different things. I tried lots of different services to sell to local businesses. And yeah, essentially I was making money. I was traveling around Southeast Asia and I was barely having to do anything to make it keep going. Now I knew it wasn't going to keep sustaining itself indefinitely, but it was like a good 3 years where it was very hands off and it was making me a lot of money. So it was real. It was actually solid. So I started to invest that money. I bought some property in London. I met Ash, my co-author, and he taught me about the world of startups, tech startups, how you can invest in them, how it works. And I was like, oh, this is an interesting world. I know about the online business world, but I didn't know about the tech startup world, the Silicon Valley style startups. So I started to angel invest with him. He was the first marketing director of Just Eat, which is, I guess, a bit like DoorDash, something like that in the US, huge in Europe. It had a $2.4 billion IPO in 2014, and he was one of the first team members, Ash. So, yeah, I became his friend. He was sort of a mentor to me early on, taught me about the tech startup world. And actually, he liked how I was investing with him, how I analyzed them. And those insights became the Unfair Advantage book. All the experience I'd had in business up to that stage, and also all the insight that we'd gotten in getting pitched by all these business founders, all these startup founders. So it was a bit like Shark Tank. It was that kind of vibe a little bit. And it was really fascinating. And it was then when we realized, people have the wrong idea of what makes you successful. We want to write about this. So we we thought we'd just self-publish. We thought it would be this little thing, because we never bothered to, to get a publishing deal. You actually have to be either an academic or a celebrity, like some kind of influencer or something. And we'd never bothered to like share our businesses and build personal brands or things like that at that stage. So yeah, but we were surprised to be approached by a literary agent. She was like, please don't self-publish this. This is an amazing idea. And we got a book deal in the UK and internationally, and then we got a book deal in the US with a top 5 publisher. And the book has gone on to be very successful, to be a business book of the year, to be a bestseller in multiple formats, multiple categories. So it's been a really cool journey. Since then, I've been coaching kind of online creators and other startup founders. And I've been more involved in the creator economy. I've been advising a lot of startups in the creator space, and I've been advising a lot of corporates. So I've been doing consulting, keynote speaking, training about personal brand building, about storytelling, and also about the creator economy and all the different possibilities. It's a bit like influencer marketing, but like teaching how that works organically. So this is where my life, my career, my businesses have tended towards. And that's kind of like a good summary of how I ended up where I am.
Quite an amazing journey, and you hit on a lot of the hot topics in there. You touched on fear of starting, right, when you first started out, and I find that this is pretty common amongst most people that I talk to that are talking about they want to start a business or live their dream or live their passion. But talk to me a little bit about your mindset at that point in time, what that fear did to you. What did you kind of do to overcome that fear, and where did you find the confidence just to kind of step out and do it?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question, because this is something that really was a big obstacle for me, a big challenge was to get past this. Some people, I feel like some people are the types that just jump straight into projects. They don't do enough research. They don't learn enough about it. They just kind of dive in. They're not very strategic. They just like, it's almost like running super fast, but in the wrong direction. But those types of people can be really successful because sometimes they run in the right direction, or maybe they learn as they go and they adapt and they change direction. But I'm not in that category. And I think most people watching this aren't in that category. We're probably in the category, and if you're listening to a podcast or a YouTube channel like this, you're probably in the category like I am, which is the type that over researches, overly plans, overthinks, and doesn't take enough action. And basically, that was me. I was kind of more worried to start. Yeah, I was more worried to start. I was more worried to like, what is this going to look like? Is this going to be embarrassing? Am I going to fail? And actually, when I had that during that time period, I decided I wasn't going anywhere. I was like working on my website to get ready to launch, and it just months later I still hadn't launched. And my parents were like, I was living at my parents' house, and I was in my bedroom, and they were like, okay, you said you're starting a business. Where's the business? You need to go find a job. And I'm like, I couldn't even argue at that stage. I was like, yeah, like I knew I did. So, and that's why I got some sales jobs. So I did some biz dev and sort of sales roles just to get started, because that's kind of the most important skill in business. And usually the one that's lacking is the ability to just find your first customer or first client. So yeah, it's been something that I've struggled with in my life, the procrastination stuff. Stephen Pressfield calls it the resistance in his book about it, called The War of Art. I don't know if you're familiar, but that book I read and reread multiple times. It didn't even help that much, but it kind of made me more aware that this was fear that was holding me back. Um, and really, I think the key is just to get enough foundations, because like going the other extreme is also bad, to not know anything about what you're about to do. I think just have some foundational knowledge, just have like just enough to get started and start, and then do the rest of your learning as just in time learning. So when you face a problem, be like, okay, now how do I solve this? Who do I speak to? What books do I read? What podcasts do I listen to solve this problem? And that sort of just in time learning style is so much better than like just devouring tons and tons of books and doing nothing with it, because even your brain doesn't really engage with it correctly because it doesn't even know how to apply it. It doesn't have any practical thing to apply it to. So it's just like broad, abstract kind of theoretical knowledge, which is no good. Business is a practical thing. It's like learning to drive just by doing the theory and learning the street signs and learning where the on button in the car is, what the pedals do. It's like, but you have to actually get behind the wheel, to actually learn to drive. And it's similar to that. It's not like history where it's just facts and figures and analysis. It's actually a practical thing. And that's what makes business so different than any side hustle or anything like that.
One thing that I know you touched on in the past, which is this imposter syndrome that oftentimes we have, that when we're stepping into these new endeavors or new businesses or looking like, to start a YouTube channel, become a creator, we all kind of suffer this thing like, I'm just not good enough. We look at all of these gurus, like we look at Ali Abdaal, who's one of my faves. I know a friend of yours, and you see he has 2 million followers, and you try to compare yourselves like, well, why would anybody watch me, or why would anybody care what I have to say? And so it prevents us from stepping forward, right? It's kind of that fear and that feeling of I'm just not good enough that oftentimes buries us into just procrastination.
So imposter syndrome is one of those things that's just unbelievably common. So I'm a business coach right now, and I have worked with a ton of clients, a ton of people who have a lot of expertise, have a lot of a background, have a lot of credentials, and they still have a lot of imposter syndrome. So no matter what, it's kind of a psychological thing that you just need to get past. The only way past is through. The only way is just to get started, get the ball rolling, and understand that everybody's just making it up as they go along. None of this is like people know exactly what they're doing. Like that's how business works. Business is like there are some core principles, and there's a background, you might have some experience, but you only get that experience by doing it. You can't get experience just by reading books. So you have to just, again, have just enough. Look, we actually designed the part 3 of the book to just be a quick start guide where you just give just enough information just to get people started. And we had a lot of good feedback on that because people are like, yes, I know what to do now, but I want to know more. And I'm like, yeah, like you'll get to that. Let's just face your first problem and then you can kind of solve it. And so the imposter syndrome thing is something that you just have to push through, because we all feel that way. And it's just the only way to build confidence. It's kind of a confidence thing. And the only way to build that confidence is to build competence. And competence is built through action and experience and talking to people and talking to customers and selling them stuff and then trying to fix something that isn't working, not by reading books. So I think the key is just to get started, and you'll build competence and you'll build confidence, and you won't feel as much of an imposter as you did before. That's the key.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I found that to be true throughout my journey as I ventured through life and just tried different things and ventured from different industry to different industry. You just you got to jump in there and kind of learn as you go. And you'll be surprised how much you can pick up if you immerse yourself deeply into it and start getting the right resources. There's 2 things I really want to touch on. I want to make sure we have some time to get to that. So obviously there's this Miles framework that you reference in your book on how to discover your unfair advantage. And then what I would really want to touch on right now is this fact of life being unfair, because that's kind of the first part of the book. And what drives me into it is, we have this harsh reality that life is just unfair. And I know that with businesses, sometimes it's easy to see that if there's a particular problem that you're trying to solve and you find a solution, if you take the right steps and kind of put yourself in the right place at the right time, that things will happen for you. But you work with a lot of creators, you work in the creator economy, and I find sometimes with artists, this may be a little different because it's not just this unique problem that you're trying to solve, but it's more this creativity that's more subjective. I'm just curious to kind of get your thoughts on that as, a business versus somebody on the creative side of things, how that intertwines and how we can find some of these unfair advantages on the creator side and use that to leverage to become successful in that field.
Yeah, this is very interesting, actually. It's one of the biggest areas, surprisingly, that's been loving the book. people that work in show business. So even more like it's very, very creative, right? And even if they're not doing anything kind of entrepreneurial, even if they're just like actors, basically, they can really relate to the unfair advantage stuff because it really applies. It applies in pretty much every industry, but it applies when it comes to creative things. There's less of an objective measure of what's good and what isn't. There's more subjectivity, and wherever you have more subjectivity, there are going to be more cognitive biases that come into play. So if in a theoretical world, which doesn't even really exist, this hypothetical scenario where there is a purely like mathematical job and you can quantify how good, or actually, let's just say sales. That's not purely mathematical. There's a lot of charm, obviously, involved in sales, a lot of soft skills, but there is cold, hard numbers of how many sales you made, right? And so unfair advantages maybe apply less, but actually they still apply massively in sales because the clients and customers and prospects will treat you different based on how you talk, how you look, your status, all these other things, that other signals that they're getting. So I really struggle to think of somewhere where unfair advantages don't exist. I was trying to say something like technical, whereby you could just measure something purely technical. Can somebody fix this problem or code to this thing? But then the hiring process, you still have unfair advantages at play. But when it comes to the creative side, it's hugely about unfair advantages, again, because you're just dealing with people's proclivities, what they like, what their interests are. And that's when you come into cognitive biases. That's when you come into the human mind, which is very biased and that's very normal. It's not something you can actually fix. And it just is what it is. So I think it applies to business, but I also think it applies to careers, and particularly careers whereby you have to kind of earn each gig and get each gig, and it's hard to objectively measure how good somebody is. Like, how objectively good is a YouTube video? It's a subjective thing based on how many people liked it, right? So it's just about people. So I think I think you're touching on the right points, basically, that the world is unfair, and the only way to get success is to understand that the world is unfair and understand that it's about leveraging unfair advantages. And that doesn't mean unethical or illegal advantages. It just means things which give you a head up or a leg up over the competition. Something like knowing the right people, something like being able to afford the right gear, something like being able to leverage what you have going on in your city or where you live, or some backdrops, or the other people that live where you live. So the whole point of being, the whole reason Hollywood, let's say, became a thing is because everybody, started to make movies there. And so actors and actresses started to move there, directors started to move there, scriptwriters started to move there, and then you get a hub. And it's the same thing with Silicon Valley, and we talk about that in the location chapter. So there are all these reasons how you come across, what you look like, your accent. These are all areas that people don't really think about when it comes to success, but actually it's an obvious thing staring them in the face. They're not surprised when they hear it. They're like, oh yeah, of course. Like, so it's one of those things where people are actually aware of how unfair things are. But if you were to just read self-development books, you'll easily forget, because they'll just tell you it's about working hard. They'll tell you it's just about like being more disciplined, which is a huge piece of it, but it's not the only thing. And it makes the underlying assumption that we all start from the same starting line, which we don't. So it's good to be aware of that. It's good to have a more realistic mindset about it. And also it's good to double down on your strengths rather than focus on your weaknesses, which sometimes self-development books get you to focus on your weaknesses more. I'm saying all this because as a fan of self-development and self-help books, that's why I kind of had to have these realizations as I went through my career, my businesses, etc. And that's basically the underlying assumptions of the book. It's about unfair advantages. It's about discovering, and also everybody has unfair advantages, and that's the key.
I think, in that Miles framework, there's two that really jump out, which is money and status, right? We all think about that. If you have a whole lot of money, it's always the people that have money that are able to weather the storm, or they're able to take risks financially. They're able just to not have to worry about working a full-time job. They could dedicate their life to starting something new because they have the financial resources, or they can afford to fail,
Yeah,
right? The
exactly.
other thing is status. People that come from, a lineage of actors, or they have famous people in their family.
Hmm.
Obviously, it's easy to say they have an unfair advantage
Hmm.
because they have connections right away and they're kind of born into it. Let's talk about some of the others in that framework: intelligence and insight, location and luck, education and experience. Because I think these are the three
Yep.
that most of us would really have to hone in first. I mean, I think if you have money and if you have status, those are kind of the obvious ones where you say, I can leverage this to
Yeah.
my advantage, right? Let's dive
Yeah.
in those other three.
So another one which can be seen as quite obvious for some people, or some people really focus on, is intelligence. They'll be like, "Oh, I'm just not smart enough," or "That's just because they're super smart. They're just geniuses. That's why they're so successful." And actually, yeah, like part of the reason we wanted to write the book is to be realistic and say, yeah, being smart actually helps. If you look at the real outlier success stories, a lot of them are incredibly smart. A lot of them actually, the real big outliers, like if you look at like Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, etc., Oprah Winfrey, you'll notice that they're strong in every area. Now, they might not have started out with a lot of money, let's say, or all of these kinds of things, but often they did. Often, like most of them aren't like rags to riches stories, right? Like the really top people. Um, but sometimes they are. But the point is that they have such strong unfair advantages in other spaces, in every piece of the Miles framework. So the Miles framework is a way to audit and categorize different unfair advantages. We have money, which, as you said, is the one that people think about. A good example is Trump saying, "My dad gave me a small loan of $1 million," and this is in the 1970s. I mean, it's just a
Small
small
loan.
loan. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But with
Just some
inflation,
chump
what is that?
change.
It's like 10 million with inflation. And then you have intelligence and insight. So that one's an important one. So we think of intelligence as just being like, oh, he's so smart. But we don't kind of break down. I remember researching intelligence is actually quite hard to define, funnily enough. You have IQ, which is an interesting measure, but then it's actually not necessarily that useful on an individual level. It's more of like a kind of a population level thing, and it can just feel like it's limiting you. But the other two areas are social and emotional intelligence. Like you can think of it as street smarts, like common sense, street smarts, people skills. And the other area is creativity. And those are areas often not thought about when it comes to intelligence, right? So these are very important unfair advantages that you can have, and you can also develop some of these. And then you have location and luck is right place, right time. And it's where you're located is a huge piece of it. But there are pros and cons. It's a double-edged sword. You can be like in some, you can be in, you grew up in Manhattan in New York, or you grew up in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley, or you grew up in Hollywood, or whatever it is, right? But at the end of the day, that has pros and cons, and you can, coming from like let's say a smaller town somewhere, there are some benefits to that. So you can kind of be aware of it, move if you need to, but also think about the benefits of being where you are nowadays with the internet. So especially before, there's a huge advantage to being in a location. Nowadays, it still exists, of course, but then there are a lot of things you could just do remotely. And I ran whole teams remotely from all over the world. And if you have lower rents, you have lower costs of living. That can give you a big leg up because you have longer runways. And the luck part of it is about timing. A huge factor in success is actually timing. But one of the ways to get more lucky is just to roll the dice more. Just try more things because then you might hit some lucky timing by some chance. One of the things I'm doing this week at the time of recording, and hopefully I'll continue this, is I decided, hey, why am I not doing a video every single day? Why not? Like, what's stopping me? I could just do a short. I could just do like a 1 minute thing. What's actually stopping me? Because when I look back on when I started, if you see my YouTube channel, there are some old videos that aren't even edited and they've done decently well, like 1,000 views or something, on something which is just a one take, no edits. It's like, if I had just continued to do that, even one a week, by now in like 2 years, I'd have had like 100 videos. Like that's quite a good data point to learn. One of those could have just blown up. I could have just got lucky, but I chose not to at that stage, which is bad. And that's why if you do more things, you put yourself out there more, you try more things, you can get lucky. And finally, the E finally, because we're talking about the one that isn't status, because status is the last one. But before status, we have E, which is education and expertise. And we often look at the college dropout success stories. But reality is, like, actually most successful people finished college. Most of them actually got the benefits. Even the dropouts, they got the benefits of being at that college as a signaling factor, as a status factor. Let's say Mark Zuckerberg from Harvard, which helped him raise all the funding and get all the co-founders and things like that for his startup. And expertise. Expertise is sort of the least unfair advantage. It's funny to think about this philosophically of what's actually unfair and what isn't. But here's a good example. Ash Ali, my co-author, he got into the internet back in the late 90s by luck. He was working at Staples, the big box store for that do stationery and things.
Oh yeah.
And they had computers and they had computer books. And if he had just gotten a job at like a clothes store instead, it was just coincidence. But he might know a lot about clothes instead. But where you develop an expertise, some areas blow up because they're just, let's say, like Tony Hawk with skateboarding. That could have just been a sport that went nowhere, but it is a sport that actually went huge, and he became super famous for it. But it could have just been like pogo sticks or something that he was obsessed with, and then no one would have given a damn, right? So there's a lot of there is a lot of setting you up for successful expertise, but also there's a lot of your own hard work. So I developed an expertise in marketing. It's because I decided to study marketing. It's because I came across some online courses. I was doing my research, but also I was in a position where I had the time, the money to invest. I had the time to invest. I didn't have to jump into a job to pay my bills. I was able to live in my parents' house in expensive London. So these are the kinds of reasons that expertise can be an unfair advantage. You develop an expertise in a space. And finally, as you stated, status. It's like how you come across, who you know, what you sound like, your socioeconomic status, your status as an influencer, how many subscribers or followers you've got, and just who you know. And then we also cover inner status, which is like your self-esteem and your confidence, your inner voice, how you see yourself, which affects how you're viewed. So that's a way to give a huge comprehensive overview of the Miles framework.
I think this whole conversation that you and I here today is kind of evidence of that luck and the fact that sometimes you just have to put yourself out there more often, because the fact that I put out a short featuring your book and tagged you in it put me out there for you to be able to make this connection for us to be here today. And I'm blessed and I'm humbled and forever grateful for you taking the time to chat with us about this today. I wish we had more time. We could probably sit and talk about it forever. And so, for those that are listening, I know you're going to grab the book. If you haven't read the book already, we'll definitely have the link in the description for The Unfair Advantage. You can definitely follow Hasan on all of his socials. We'll have the links. Coaching and business coaching and life coaching. Hasan, you still doing that?
That's right, yeah. And I'm on all the socials. Like I still can just about see all the DMs that are coming through. I don't I don't have to I'm not, I make the effort to go through them. I take the time to see the incoming. I don't have time to reply to every single one, of course, but I do see pretty much every single one. Yeah, it's rare that one slips through the cracks because I take the time. I think it's very important. It gives you the insights. One thing we didn't touch on is in the intelligence part is insight. And insight into your audience, your readers, in my case, your customers, your clients is the most important thing. Insight into a problem, insight into a demographic. And that's why I like to listen and I like to see everybody sending me a message and see what they're saying and see the feedback, see the comments, see what YouTube. Every week there are like at least 3 or 4 different YouTube videos that come out about the Unfair Advantage book, which is incredible. And I've started to I just do a search and I comment and I see what people are saying about it, and it's a great thing to do, to just get that feedback and stay connected.
Yeah. So, hey, life lessons from Hasan. He's done it. He's the expert here. So, take in every word, follow his actions, follow his steps, stay engaged with your audience, know who they are, right? Have those insights. Hasan, thank you so much. I do appreciate it. It means the world to me. Best of luck to you. I'm sure that we're going to be seeing you time and time again. Hopefully you'll have another book for us coming soon. And we'll keep our eyes out there on the socials and see what else you're up to.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. And the other thing that I'm doing more of in this year, 2023, is public speaking. Because now that everything's not on Zoom anymore, because I've had enough of doing keynote speeches on Zoom or workshops on Zoom, is in person. So I've been doing more conferences, more speaking to corporates, especially about the creator economy. So that's an area that if anybody's looking for a speaker or looking for some consulting, I've been consulting some startups in that space. That's something I'm looking to do more of because I enjoy it. It's something that I really enjoy doing, something in person. Especially, I used to be scared of public speaking, but when I was younger. But I've now been really enjoying the public speaking and teaching and things like that. So yeah, thank you so much for having me, Paul. And would love to connect with anybody who's listening, watching this, and have a talk.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Hope to see you again, and you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Take care.